the June 16th, 2020 McMinnville Water and Light Commission, and I'll have Trina do a roll call.
Mayor Hill,
Here.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Here.
Commissioner Gormley,
Here.
Commissioner Fuchs will hopefully be joining us soon, and Commissioner Christensen is excused.
Thank you, Trina. Our first order of item this evening is a consent agenda minutes of our previous main meeting dated June the 19th and May 21st. Anyone, any of the commissioners want to take anything off of the consent agenda? Hearing none, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
No.
And a second.
Second.
So moved by Ed
Second.
and seconded by Tom. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Consent
Aye.
agenda. Consent agenda passes unanimously. We have our accounts payable and purchasing reports. Any comments about that?
Just for the record, I'm going to abstain from this. I think there may be a check in there to my employer, so just for the
Okay.
record, I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think we don't vote on that. That's just
Yeah.
for to be reviewed. Okay, let's see. Consult and partners report. Brent on the line yet?
You know, I just got a text from Brent. It sounds like he's having trouble getting into the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
Um,
He could call in if he needed to.
His report's pretty simple this month, just an update on what's going on and how the loads are squaring up and what's left to do in the one contract or the contract to 21. So
Yeah.
I suggested he call into Trina. Hopefully that, I don't know if that exactly how that would work, but
Okay.
if you call into somebody's cell phone, we'd be okay.
So let's wait just a moment if he's trying to call in.
While we're waiting, I should explain, we are experimenting with satellite internet at our cabin. And so I think there's a delay. There's a slight delay when I say something, look like, so that's what's going on. It's
Okay.
not great yet, I'll tell you, but it's better than what I had before, which didn't work at all. So
So when you yawn, you want to put your hand to your face first before you yawn. You had a still photo that would have been priceless.
Really?
It would have been worth a lot of money
oh,
to some of us.
okay. Thank you. Thank you.
It's really, Tom, it is in slow motion. It's not like you. No.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. No, this tech support will call me any week now. So
So are you able to see us, or is it working the same way that we're hacked up too?
yeah, it works. It works pretty well. I can see it. Sometimes the language breaks up a little bit, but I can follow the meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
And same with you. Sometimes you are pretty choppy, but
Okay. Well, let me know if I don't come through, and I'll repeat myself if I can.
well, when we voted, you came through when it was the negative.
Oh, there's Patrick.
But I knew better, Tom.
Yes. Oh, really? Oh, man, that was slow.
Looks like, Patrick, you got a haircut.
You're on mute.
Yes, I'm excited about that. The wife I moved to Dallas and she had my haircut, so good deal.
Patrick, good evening.
It looks like Trina's talking to Brent right now and they're trying to get him squared away.
We're talking to Sam.
Yeah, the two of them.
Mr. Mayor, could I make a suggestion? Should we have Gary go first since he's sitting here waiting in the
Yeah.
the waiting room?
So we'll go down to new business and just do one item in new business, and that would be the property liability workman's comp insurance renewal. So Mark, do you want to do any introductions before we turn it over to Gary?
Maybe just one that the staff report this year, we included the just a comparison of prior year to current year costs, kind of as they show up in the general ledger, just for additional information. And Gary and I kind of worked through that together the other day. So other than that, I'm grateful Gary's willing to present each year for us. It's really helpful. So thanks.
Good. Okay, Gary, welcome. It's good to have you on the line with us.
Good to see you all. Thank you for the invitation. I did put together my stewardship report, which working with Mark, I think we did get all the numbers to match up, and so it should be consistent. This has been a real challenging year. City, county, and PACE, which handles all of our school districts, are both taking fairly significant increases. The reinsurance negotiations have been extremely challenging. So it's kind of a sign that we're going to see some changes ahead with all of our insurance, not just this insurance. But so this is a case where they deal direct with the reinsurers, and usually we don't get a read on it until the companies have their treaties realigned, and then we find out after that fact, which is later in the year or first of next year. But the signs are pointing towards higher property rates, higher auto rates, and we were pretty fortunate. Just kind of going down through my quote here, the CIS package went up 4% to 322,000 this year, which is up from 310 last year. But the average member increase was 15%. And I had one delivered last night, which was almost 37%. So that raised the average a little bit. But they had adverse loss history. So at least they're using a weighted formula, which is good for water and light. So we're looking at on the work comp, I think, yeah, that actually came up a little bit, primarily because the mod increased from a 0.64 to a 0.72. So that's, I don't know what the percentage is, but what would that be, Patrick? You can give me that real quick. What is it, about 9% increase? So
Yes.
something like that. But anyway, that adjusts, that's a big part of it. Then the payrolls went up 3%. That was the rest of it. But the rates are relatively the same as last year, which is also, that's good, because the work comp, they have several tiers, and when the mod goes up, sometimes that'll bump you to the next tier, and that is not the case here. So we had a very favorable renewal there as well.
So Gary, water and light's on its own. We're not involved with the city on this rating, right?
That's correct. So you're currently on your own with regard to that. Let me just double check. I have the city here. Just let me see if their mod is the same as yours. I don't think it is. No, you have your own experience mod, which is good because that's lower than the city's. So that said, the CIS pieces are relatively good, even though they're up. But compared to the rest of the membership, I think we're pretty good. We looking at page 2 on the stewardship report, the earthquake rates did go up 5% over last year, which actually is pretty good too, considering earthquake rates are going up considerably. About 3 years ago, we moved you from to a different carrier, and we did save you about $7,000-8,000 at that time. And now we're back up to about where we were when we moved it, but we're still in the best carrier that we can find. So the rates are solid. The coverage is good.
And that's with Landmark.
Mark.
I'm sorry.
Is that with Landmark
Oh,
American?
Yes, actually it is. The let me just, I have it right here. Let me just see the Landmark American Insurance Company, which is actually RSUI. So it's a little bit confusing because RSUI was is an acronym for a totally different company that was purchased by Landmark. So, or vice versa. I'm not even sure which one purchased which one. But yes, that is Landmark. And then on the fiduciary, we do not have the renewal on that, but it's a relatively small premium, and it's been pretty static the last couple of years. At 4,600, I think we're just we're budgeting or looking at a 5 to 7% increase, hoping that it won't go up at all. The one area though that's I think going to be a positive is the next paragraph. Several years ago, we purchased the cyber risk policy, and with Sam's help and doing an analysis on the contract requirements, we were able to get a very competitive bid from Philadelphia at that time. And last year, we did get an alternative bid from City County because they raised their eligibility from a 50,000 to $1 million. And their rate was really good, but it was still $1 million short of the limits that you were carrying. And so we stayed with the Philadelphia, which is a very solid company. Now this year, I will bring a couple of markets to the table because we do have a couple of very competitive markets, and I'm moving quite a few of my cyber policies to these two markets, which if they are competitive, I'll give you more background on that. But that does not come up until August 19th. So I might be coming to the next meeting if you want me to. Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that coverage and the pricing on that. So was there anything else that, basically that's the existing coverages and the existing renewal premiums. With
So, Gary, you're telling us that the D&O or the director's insurance is still hanging?
No, the directors and officers is a part of the public liability, which is in the CIS package.
There was something you said you hadn't seen the policy on yet.
Oh, the cyber, that's that
Oh, I'm sorry.
cyber,
Okay.
cyber
Right.
liability, cyber risk, they call it.
Okay.
And they're really actually fine tuning those policies. They're adding more and more coverages. A lot of the things that we're seeing claims on are the cyber extortion, where they'll come in and Patrick, I don't even know what terminology is when they come in and they'll freeze up your system or encrypt your entire database.
That's cyber ransom stuff.
Cyber ransom, yeah. And so that's we're seeing a lot of that. It's not a real high. They usually only charge I think it's like $20,000 to de-encrypt it, and the FBI recommends that you do it. But then you have to, once you de-encrypt it, you better re-encrypt it or do whatever you can to protect it, because they still have that bot in there, whatever it's called. So I think it's one of those things that we're seeing a lot of. Nobody really understands all the exposures in the cyber yet. So we got a situation there where we really don't even know what the next risk will be. If there's if you have some questions on the limits or the coverage forms, I'll be glad to go into detail on it. This is kind of a 36,000 foot view of the premiums and the renewals and kind of what's going on in the industry. But we do, there is one thing that's happening right now that I think is you need to be aware of. Under the current policies, there's no exclusion for under either the work comp or the general liability for any kind of a communicable disease. And as of July 1, these reinsurers are all going to place exclusionary language in these contracts. And so that's a sign of what's going to happen over the course of the next year. I would expect virtually every insurance policy will have some kind of a communicable disease exclusion, kind of like terrorism was excluded after 9/11. And so there is no solution for that. There's no there's no TRIA Act, which was the government stepping up to kind of provide a backstop and allow the insurance companies to provide terrorism coverage. So, but they are talking about in this next round of the economic, what are the PPP and all the other things that they've been doing, legislation that they've been introducing.
Yeah,
Pardon?
the
Yeah.
CARES Act.
Yes, and what they're proposing, and I think it's going to get passed, is a immunity, which will be granted, be a federal immunity, which is important because right now you do have the statutory immunity with the state of Oregon, which protects you if you have any kind of a suit brought in this jurisdiction. But if it goes into federal jurisdiction, then you do not have the tort protection that you would have under the Oregon statutes. So this would be a federal tort protection if they do put it in place. I don't know how it's going to play out between private and public entities. But we'll be watching it really close. But the main thing is you just have to risk management, do everything you can that you're doing already, create a defensible position, make sure that that you're not taking risks or putting anybody at risk. Keep your standards high, and the burden of proof is obviously going to have to fall on the parties that are bringing a lawsuit. But what their big concern is that class action suits, which will be very expensive to defend, and we won't have any defense protection for you under these contracts. At least that's what it sounds like. They might give us 100,000 defense only, but I don't know whether they'll get that or not. So I'll keep you posted on that, though.
Any other questions for Gary? Again, as I look at the bottom line, it looks to me to be a 5.75% increase over the last fiscal year, with a couple of estimates involved in that too, but those are not the high volume cost.
Right. Yeah, that sounds pretty close. Basically, the only solid numbers we have are the earthquake and the CIS quotes for work comp and the PC property liability. So it sounds like it's about right. I didn't do the math on that combined increase.
So, Mr. Mayor, staff is requesting we accept Gary's presentation and approve the insurance for year 2020-21. So I would do that.
And a second?
Second.
It's been moved by
Second?
and passed by and seconded by Patrick. All in favor of accepting the proposal of property liability workman's comp insurance renewal, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Yeah, and are you intending
Aye.
that? Okay,
That was a delayed yes.
okay. Are you intending to bring back the fiduciary and the cyber risk in July or August? Is that?
Yes, the fiduciary, as soon as we get it, we will forward that over. So I would say that I am expecting it to come in easily underneath that 5 to 7% budget range that Mark has in there. But we'll.
So does the commission want to authorize that fiduciary policy if it comes in?
That was my
range
intent with my motion, please.
of 5 to 7.
Okay. I may come back on the cyber risk in August because that might be a totally different contract, which I'd like to at least have the chance to answer questions on that.
Okay, so we'll understand that the motion includes an approval of the fiduciary liability in that 5 to 7 range, but but not the cyber risk. We'll come back to the commission on that.
Because we could have a different carrier, it sounds like.
We could.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate all your hard work, and it's always good to hear from you.
It's good to see you all. This was
Be safe, Gary.
you all too. We'll
Good
talk
night,
to you
Gary.
soon. Bye.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks. We've got Brent on the line. So Brent,
Thank
we'll go back up to the consultant report and go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize. It took me a little while to get through here on the Zoom, but good evening. We're pretty insulated and not really affected by a lot of the volatility in the log market, but I thought I'd continue to give you a little update on the current log market, sawmill status, all but a few sawmills are completely open, buying logs again. Log prices have come up, or they're still generally lower than before the shutdown, but some of the mills, particularly in Southern Oregon, are actually offering prices right at those pre-shutdown levels. So things are bouncing back pretty quick. Of course, Herbert Lumber and Frank, as I've been talking about, have remained completely open throughout this whole ordeal, and continue to plan to harvest all the sales in 2020. 2019 sale that's left, the 720 road is virtually complete. A few loads of pulp left to haul off of that, and quite a bit of cleanup / piling and some road work to finish. And weather permitting, that should wrap up here pretty quick next few weeks. Roughly 400 loads were shipped off that sale to Herbert Lumber and other destinations. We should come in real close on the volume and value estimates on that sale. We'll see here in the next month when we get the final numbers together, and I can let you know in July the final results on that sale. Most of the project work is done on that one as well, which mostly entailed a large rocking project of the 100 and 700 roads. 2020 sales, Lule Timber is well underway, cutting and logging on the 107 road sale. They started shipping a few loads last week. They've been actually shut down the first of this week. It's just gotten too wet, so their first day back this week will be tomorrow, and I'll be out there and see how things are going. The Boundary 300 Bald Mountain Road sale, of course, is 3 units. The Bald Mountain Road unit is entirely done. Looks real good. That's the one over by the reservoir off the Bald Mountain Road. The 300 road unit is almost complete. A few loads to get there as soon as the weather dries out a little bit, and they're unsure when they'll start on the Boundary Road unit of that sale. So we'll see. Of course, they have until the end of next year. This is a 2-year contract, but they're looking at completing everything this year. So, and we'll be tracking their volume and values to date. So far, they've shipped about 1 million feet, and we've got about $650,000 of value so far. And some of the project work is complete on that one, the slashing and pre-commercial thinning projects so far. Any questions?
Any questions for Brent? Seeing none.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
I see no appearance requests this evening. Staff reports, James, if you'd like to update us on the Lafayette transmission main project.
All right, so the Lafayette transmission main project, good news, the pipe's in the ground. So we have all the pipe installed now. We've entered into the process of pressure testing and disinfection. So on the 10th, we passed the pressure test, which was a positive sign there. And on last Friday, they began the disinfection process. And then today they grabbed samples. So things are moving along pretty quickly. We're working with Hallworth, who's the contractor over at the pump station for the city of Lafayette, and getting that coordination down. But as of right now, it looks like, depending on, with the samples being taken today, we'll have results back on Thursday, and then we can provide water, not to the city of Lafayette, but we can provide water to the pump station for testing and commissioning if that's what they desire on Friday. So things are coming along to make sure that we still have water to them by the 30th of June. That could be as early as next week. So just kind of walking through the steps here on where we're kind of at. So we had, everything's been installed out there. We have some cleanup still to do on site. The testing and commissioning process is moving along as anticipated. So with that being said, we're kind of looking at providing water to them as soon as maybe as Wednesday of next week, if things work out right. We do still have some change order work that needs to take place. Primarily, the majority of that work is paving along the shoulder near the west intertie, and then also behind the guardrail. There's some slope stabilization that needs to take place still. The overall balance, when we look at it at the end of the day, as of this point, we look like we're gonna be under budget. So not by a whole lot, but it looks like we're on track to be in that realm of being under budget. So things are looking pretty good. I mean, I'm really happy with the coordination taking place out there and the interaction with Lafayette and between Greenville Water and Light. So if you have any questions, I can address them at this time.
So James, do you want to just explain to the commission what's going on with the sleeve situation and the spacers?
Yeah,
That's on your second picture.
Sure. That's that second picture there. So you have the 28-inch HDPE pipe, and we have the pipe carriers. So every 10 feet or so, 15 feet, they put on those spacers. And what we're doing is we have a 42-inch steel casing that went behind the guardrail. The picture above you can't see the pipe because it's covered in dirt, but it's behind that guardrail there. And what they're doing is they're pulling that pipe through the casing, and the spacers there allow the pipe to slide through much easier and not drag on the metal casing there. So they actually sit on the casing and are installed in there. It took about 3 days to get that pipe pulled through there.
So how long is the casing?
The casing is about 370 feet, 360
Okay.
feet or so.
And it's meant to protect the pipe from the guardrail situation and
It's that is correct. It was required for behind the guardrail to have a casing because we're in the ODOT right away at that point. So it's a 42-inch steel casing, half-inch thick. It's not going to go anywhere.
Are they going to make us grout it back?
We put sand inside, so we had either a grout or a sand option. So they fill that casing with sand.
Okay.
Good questions.
Well, great. Congratulations on your success with the project.
Yeah. So at the next commission meeting, I do anticipate bringing forth similar to the 36-inch project, a final change order, just to document the changes that took place within the project. I expect it to be similar to what took place last time, either a credit or a no-cost change order at that point. So, but with that caveat being said, we do have why it's not being presented tonight is we have the paving and the work being the guardrails all being tracked on time and materials. So until the work's done, we don't know the actual number.
Okay. Any other questions for James? As Ed indicated.
Does Lafayette seem happy?
Go ahead, Tom.
Does Lafayette seem happy so far?
My conversations with them have been positive. I think their goal is, it's always been their goal, is to receive water by June 30th. We've been in weekly contact with them throughout, providing updates, whether it's through change orders or just changes in the contract or just simple updates on where we're at with the process. And it's not just myself. I mean, we have a number of people here communicating back and forth. So I think it's gone really well.
Great. And does Lafayette have some work to do at their end?
Lafayette does. Their pumps got delayed by a day or two. So I believe, last I heard was earlier this morning, they were expecting their pumps to arrive around lunchtime today. I never got confirmation on that, but they should have their pumps today, and they'll be starting the installation tomorrow on those pumps. And they have 3 of them. So that's the goal. And they want to start their testing this week if they can, on the pressure testing and disinfection and so forth.
Any other questions?
Great. Thank you.
James, thank you for your report and for the success of this project.
All right, thank you.
No old business tonight. Brings us back down to new business. Let's go to item number B, the COVID-19 update, extension of the emergency declaration. And so, John, I'll turn that over to you.
Okay. So as you can see in the report, our fees are continuing to rise. obviously. The 90-day balance, especially in the electric side, has gone up, but still not compared to other utilities balances. We are in much better shape than a number of the other Oregon and actually Washington utilities as far as the arrears. And then I would also just highlight the governor's declaration. We don't know yet if the governor will extend the declaration. It expires July 6th. But I would also say that I know a number of utilities are starting to look at, and us as well, about what our plan is for reintroducing disconnects, which I think a number of utilities are starting to do that, and will start disconnects after the 4th of July.
How many, John, do we have pending disconnects?
So right now, I checked with John Spence. We have 85 people that would be at or disconnected at this time. Actually, the number has actually dropped a little bit. We're continuing to try and reach out and make contact with those customers.
Would the board be open to any kind of a payment plan to get these people propped up a little bit so that we don't have to, I mean, it costs us a lot of money to go out and do disconnects and things like that.
So one of the things that we were going to bring back to the commission at the next meeting is our plan. And that was one of the items we were going to include in that plan. I know a number of utilities are looking at doing that exactly.
Okay,
Okay.
I understand. Oh, good.
John, have you heard any of the stories of individuals that the 85 that fit in that group? Any particular reason? Is it the lack of employment right now, or have you heard any? Do you get a sense of what's driving that?
So there's a couple things. One is there's a group in there that's our normal group that has issues making payments. We haven't really heard much about the other group because it's actually smaller than that group. And then the other group is the businesses. We've seen very few businesses. I'm surprised that we have not seen a larger number of businesses in that group, but very few, one or two.
Have the usage of businesses that haven't opened,
they've decreased.
I'm
They've actually,
they're
they've
low.
decreased.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Mayor, is an extension in order then? We're going to renew our agreement?
Correct.
So I would move that we grant this
Sam-
request. Go ahead.
Sam has a resolution there.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Go ahead, Sam.
Right, and we have, it's a resolution 2020 and Trina, what's the number?
It's 16.
So it's 2020-16, a resolution by the City of McMinnville Municipal Corporation of the State of Oregon, acting by and through its Water and Light Commission, declaring extending a state of emergency with regard to operation of the water and light plants in the City of McMinnville. And this would extend to July 22nd, which is just beyond our July meeting.
Any questions for Sam on that? Hearing none.
Real quickly, Sam, did I understand correctly that if the governor rescinds the state declaration of emergency, we would have the ability to reconsider this and cut it off earlier?
Well, we can hold a special meeting to do that. This would, as it stands right now, it would just continue our special declaration to the 22nd, but we would have to come back with a special meeting if you wanted to do that.
And our plan was
Okay,
our plan was if the governor does do that, we would come back with a special meeting to have this discussion.
So that we'd follow the lead of the state.
Correct.
Okay.
But it doesn't, it's not tripped, but necessarily by the state. If the state, it operates independently.
Any other questions for Sam or John?
No.
Okay, I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
And a second? Ed moved, Tom seconded.
Second.
Trina, would you poll the council or the commission?
Mayor Hill,
Yes.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Yes.
Commissioner Gormley,
Yes.
Commissioner Fuchs.
Yes.
Okay, resolution 2020-16 passes unanimously. 1, 2, 3, 4-0. Thank you. That takes us to our next item, which is fiber cost of service. And Mark, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So before the commission this evening, we wanted to present a different cost of service model for the fiber division. Fiber division has been showing losses each year since the 2013-14 fiscal year. And part of the reason to do this is not just for the to look at the losses, but part of what we do with this division is look at our finances to determine the revenue requirement from the 3 partners that started this back in the late 90s, the city, water and light, and the school district. And so certainly our revenues that we receive currently do not cover the costs that are budgeted the way and expensed the way that we're doing this. And so we have wanted to for a while to look at this. And so this year we were able to do that. And so that's what this is about this evening, is reviewing that and for the commission to consider a potential change. So so what we did, we provided 3 attachments to the staff report, the pole contact cost of service model, and I'll get into that and kind of explain what's behind that. Also, just some history on the fiber division and the things that have occurred through the commission minutes related to the fiber division. Sam was very helpful in putting that together. And then finally, if the commission did want to consider this change, the recommendation would be to do that coinciding with the fiscal year starting, July 1st. And so there's a budget, a different budget than what's in the budget document itself that incorporates the pole contact cost of service model. So that's the last attachment. So so we began accounting for the fiber division separately as its own division in 2009. Prior to that, it was just part of the light division. And so interestingly, though, when we do our audit, our annual audit, the fiber division is not broke out. It is incorporated with the light division still. So although we account for it separately in our water and light financials, when you look at our annual audited financial report, there is no fiber division. It's part of light. So back in 2013-14, there was a different allocation model that was incorporated to charge expenses to the fiber division. It's called the Massachusetts allocation method, and it's one that's recognized by FERC. And there's several expenses that 1% is taken of those expenses that's charged from light and water to fiber. And actually beginning that year forward is when the losses began to occur. And that's because that model generates a much larger expense allocation than had previously been done. And so as we started looking at those costs and what would make sense in terms of maybe a cost allocation that maybe better represented what's actually occurring in the division, I talked with Mike Polson prior to his retirement several times about this. You know, what does IT spend? You know, what's their overhead, or what kind of time do they spend? And talk to billing, talk to Scott regarding the line crews and that. And it just seemed like we were charging a lot of expense where really maybe we weren't actually spending that much time to justify that kind of charge. And so as we began looking at this, one thought was, as we redid our pole contacts last year, pole contact charges that went into the rates, we actually talked with Mark Beauchamp at that time about using pole contacts as a method for billing costs to our fiber division, since the fiber division, just like the other telecoms, has attachments on our poles. And so we went through that with him, and he didn't perform like a full cost of service, but he did look at what we put together and had some comments, but in general said it seemed like a reasonable method if we decided to go that way. And so we continued to kind of develop that. And so that attachment, that model is, like I said, attached in the staff report. And I thought what I'd do is, if I'm really wizardry here, I would try to share that on screen as opposed to just kind of talk about it, and hope you guys are seeing what I'm trying to talk about. So I'm going to attempt to do that. You can tell me if I get it done here. All right, can you see that model?
Yeah, you've got it up, Mark.
Okay.
Yes.
So, so what this does is the current cost of service model there, the first column, this is how what's in our budget document. And so you can see our revenues, 48,000, and then our expenses as allocated, and you can see these allocated expenses. We also have some property insurance that's allocated. And then there's depreciation. And so we have a loss of 111,000 that's budgeted for next fiscal year. If we were to move to this pole contact method, it doesn't change our revenues. That would be the middle column. But it does change our expenses. And so you can see here's the pole contact charges themselves. So there would be the ones relating to that the fiber division has attached to our poles. And there's 595 of them, contacts. And so that would be the charge at the $10.18 charge that's in our rate schedule. But there's also charges for fiber contacts on Frontier, which now is Ziply Fiber, and also PGE, that actually the light division has been paying for. So we thought as we looked at this, really the fiber division should pay for the fiber contacts on those poles as well. And so we pulled those out and included them. With that change, we would no longer be charging these 1% charges that are part of that Massachusetts model. We also would be doing some additional kind of estimated billing of personnel service costs that is really just kind of based on an estimate of hours per year times the average fully loaded rate for that employee class. And so you can see those costs there under personnel. And then the insurance costs are still there. And then down at the bottom here, we remove all of the depreciation that's not directly related to the fiber optic lines and conduit. So that's you see the poles themselves, the guy wires and the anchors, that depreciation, all of that that allocated depreciation, all that gets actually moved to the light division, and those assets would be moved to the light division, since really the poles and the guy wires and the anchors, they're they're maintained by the light division anyway. So that's what would happen with the depreciation. So the depreciation becomes significantly less as well. And you can see we end up with an income of $7,800. And then the last column there, the column to the farthest right, is the same. It's really the same model, but we've removed some of the revenues and expenses out of this model. And this would be to determine our revenue requirement per the IGA for the three partners. So the revenues that we remove are the revenues associated with the business income, since that was not part of the original model. And we also then would remove the expenses related to those business customers. So you can see we remove the billing charges, and we remove, well, again, these costs for the allocated, that Massachusetts model there, of course, not included. We removed the business service charges for the billing department. And then the depreciation is not included because in the original agreement, there was not a plan to replace the system. It was just going to be operated until it was no longer viable. And so the depreciation is removed completely. And so when you do that, the income and the expense virtually net out, and we end up with a $24 profit or net income. So that just validates that actually our current level of charge, $5,400 annually for each of the members, covers what we need to cover for purposes of the agreement. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, what we came up with. Our reserves for the fund are shown below, and this doesn't affect that. These reserves are just held there and earn interest annually. And if we were to do additional, like significant repairs or that's where those funds would come into play, is to address issues with the system. And then if we went below 100,000, then we would each of the entities would put in an amount annually to bring it back up to the 100,000 level, just as a kind of a backstop to keep the system running if there was a significant problem with it. So that is that's the model that we felt like was certainly maybe more representative of what the system really, I think, costs us or takes for us to operate. I can answer any questions that you might have.
I have some.
Go ahead, Patrick.
All right, Mark. So I like this a lot better. It's much more realistic versus what you guys were doing before. So the main thing for me is between those two proposed, was there ever anything in the agreement that the other entities would, get benefit of business customers? So if we're going to the very last column, they would not, was there ever anything that says, we will, the other entities like the city or the school district would have benefit if there were business customers on there?
So I might defer to Sam on that. We looked at that question and felt that Water and Light ultimately was left to develop business operations if desired. That wasn't part of the original that the three partners originally planned or intended to do.
All right. So the next, go ahead.
Yeah, the original agreement, the school district they own 12 strands, and that was always the deal with the school district with the IGA. And so and there wasn't really the rest of the strands, the remaining 130 strands, or it's probably more than that, but right now there's 12 with the city. And the later, I think it was letter agreement number 3, the last one that was entered, the city basically turned over those strands, or because before in letter agreement number 2, the city actually had the option to buy water and light out. There was a buyout provision. Maybe that was in the original letter or the original agreement. There was a buyout provision. Well, the city decided through the later letter agreement that it did not want to buy water and light out, and essentially just turned it all over to water and light to operate. So retaining their 12 strands. So I think it's pretty clear from the agreement that those 130 strands are there for water and light to operate and either make money or lose money, but that's at our risk.
Okay, so the next thing then is, it seems pretty reasonable on the, IT side and accounting side. And so the one area that I get interested in is, the line crews. And so how, like 10 hours a year, how did we substantiate that number?
That was conversation with Scott. So that's a low number, and part of that is because much of what they would do would be included in those pole costs, but there are occasionally times where they'll do something that is sort of outside of that, and but we did feel like it was pretty minimal, and that's why we came up with the 10 hours.
So that wasn't like an average over the last 5 years or something of what line crew actually did to maintain that thing?
Yeah, I don't know that it's not something that we necessarily even track, because it just gets billed to we don't have any direct payroll billings to the fiber division. It was more just in conversation and just the experience of Scott and what the line crews is doing.
Okay, so the last thing then is kind of being a stickler about this, but when you talk about the anchors in your depreciation part, my understanding of how you build things is that anchors and guy wires and such, for the fiber are different than for the electrical. And so is it fair that we put that on the electrical? And I know this might be a de minimis sort of thing, but that fiber gets put on heights that are different than power and other comms. And so they would have their own, anchors that would be directly applicable to the fiber build.
Yeah, that was another thing that Scott and I talked about. Scott might be able to help me.
So yeah, typically, and going back to the first thing, on a pole change out for like a typical tangent pole, literally to transfer the fiber while we're transferring the electric facilities, the fiber literally is like 10 or 15 minutes. Just the poles are pre-drilled typically, the new poles. So it's put a bolt in, fiber block, transfer the fiber. So it is literally like 10 or 15 minutes to transfer the fiber on a typical pole change out, one person. So as far as anchors, typically following our own route, so line and buck poles or dead end poles that require guying, we have standards with our anchors, and so typically they're oversized and there's available capacity, and so there's really not any additional need for the fiber anchors, and that's something that should just be part of the pole contact rate.
Right, that helps. So you guys aren't running extra anchors for the fiber part because the way that you have it engineered, the anchors that deal with the electrical part take care of the fiber part as well because of the power space?
Not normally, correct.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, I like that model. I think that's, so then the last part is, what that 21 grand a year for your depreciation on the fiber and stuff, you have like 100 grand or so in the kitty. And so in 10 or 15 or 20 years, maybe when you start having issues, kind of what is the plan as far as, we're going to replace just kind of incrementally and organically? Do we want a pot of money at the end so that, this thing is taken care of in perpetuity? I mean, kind of what are your thoughts there, Mark, on how you guys have your reserves? And then we're basically allocating, 21 grand a year for, essentially, I assume it's eventual replacement.
Yeah, in the, so one of the attachments is the financial statements or the budget document, what it would look like if this pole cost model was used, pole contact model was used. And in that, if you look at the cash flow, kind of at the bottom of that, it actually shows that we are increasing cash, I think by around 25,000-ish a year. And the result of that is the little bit of income that the division would be creating under this model, but also that we have depreciation, but we're not reinvesting that depreciation into the system, and so it just generates additional cash flow as a result of that. And so over time, we will build cash and could do some system replacement, rejuvenation, but this model does not really address full system replacement over time. To do that, we would need to we really would have been needing to do something earlier, and we'd have to make changes to, we'd have to plan for some cash infusion, I think, in order to do that in the future, to really backstop the whole system.
So in about 20 years, you'd have another 200 grand, maybe added to your 100 and some. So you'd have about 3 something after 20 years, which, may be a reasonable chunk of money to, take care of it, or take care of parts that are in need of attention.
Yeah, it certainly would help.
Right. Yeah, this looks good so far.
I had a
Go ahead, Tom.
I had a follow-up question for Pat from Patrick's comments. Are we going to be tracking the line costs? Because that seemed to me to be low too. I don't know much about it, but it just struck me as pretty low. So will we track that from now on to see if that number works? Or is it not worth it?
Well, again, we weren't planning on tracking it. And that, again, is largely because the pole contact methodology itself has built into it the assumption of some line crew costs associated with managing and dealing with those contacts on the poles. So that was kind of just like
would that include?
Sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me, does that include repairing the line if there's a problem with the line?
Yes, my understanding is that maintenance is built into that. So like a repair, say like a car hits a pole, at this point, we have not, to my knowledge, we don't actually charge the fiber division typically for those. Those get all charged to the light division because those assets are the poles are part of the light division. And
But I think Tom's asking the question, let's say the fiber gets broken. That would not be part of the light division's responsibility.
that's true, right?
And it would come out of the maintenance fund at that point.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I would say, for Tom's sake, even though that number is a little low, if you look at the data, as I recall over all these years, and you look at the frequency that, we have like that camper that had a fire and it melted the fiber and we had to replace it. While that might have cost 10 or 20 grand to do so, those occurrences are relatively rare. And so, that number, you might have an event every 5 to 10 years. And so I would think the averages wouldn't be too awful in that. I mean, it might be a little bit higher, but I just don't think I think it's relatively rare that something breaks or is destroyed and they have to go out and replace it on the fiber side.
But Patrick, in that instance, we would go to the maintenance fund take care of those costs. It would not come out of that. What he's showing here is just the minor
Every year.
things that happen that we need to do.
Okay.
And as
Well,
I
so
recall that,
are some of those occurrences or events where you have a fire, for example, that melts it like we've had in the past? Is that in a covered insured event?
That was one where we did the work and then we were reimbursed from insurance for that one.
Okay, yeah. So
So
we have a way to not have it harm our balance sheet by using insurance.
Correct. In that case, it was a truck out on Hill Road, if I remember right,
Yeah.
and it caught fire, hay truck, got our fiber. We went and redid all of that, and then their insurance reimbursed us for those costs.
Okay, I feel better about that from these one-off events.
Right.
several years ago, there was an event on Booth Bend Road also where there was a fire that started in a ditch that melted down, and we used money out of that maintenance fund for those repairs. So typically everything is done under a work order, and we have the ability to track those costs if they're work order jobs. So as I recall, in looking at this too, that 10-hour number was non-work order work, which is the rare times that we have to go out, maybe a fiber dead end let's go or something, very rare type work that's not normal. So anything of significance is usually done under a work order. A pole change out would be a work order. Somebody causing damage from a fire or a car hit pole, somebody runs into a riser for a vault. Most all of that stuff we do capture the cost for.
Well, if under the IGA agreements,
If a pole, I'm sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
no, you're fine. I'll go after you. I'm
Okay,
good.
I'll do. Thank you. If a pole were to blow down or something, and we had to repair the fiber because it was damaged when that happened, would that be a non-work order, or would it be something out of the maintenance fund? And then where does that show up in these allocated expenses?
I think it would be, I mean, it would be a maintenance item out of the maintenance fund. That in practical application though, because we would put all of that to a work order, we would probably need to do some accounting in order to make it end up being pulled from the fiber maintenance, that reserve fund. I think if we didn't do anything, it likely would all go to light as a light work order.
But this, so my question is, would that show up in this cost of service, or would you just take it out of capital essentially?
What we do is we'd have to, it would come out of this reserve fund through an adjustment.
So that balance would go down if we had a work order.
Okay, I guess this is fine this year because it's not huge dollars and it's a good way to try to do things. But next year I would like to know what the work order maintenance was, what came out of the maintenance fund, since you'll be tracking that, right?
And so, Mark, let me ask this question here. Looking at your fiber reserve fund, there's a line that says decreases in fund major repairs. Is that where you would put those items?
Right.
And we have not had anything in the last year.
But that will be tracked, right?
Yeah, it would go into a work order. Because they haven't happened since I've been here. I have not, I'm not familiar with how I don't know off the top of my head how I would go in and capture that to charge the reserve fund in the fiber division.
I can probably answer that. The way I would do it, Mark, is you would do the work order and it would go through the division for fiber.
Okay.
So fiber is
Okay,
division
great.
4.
Thank you.
So that's how you would track that, is through division 4. The work order would be allocated to division 4, and then it would subtract off of this dollar amount.
So that way we'd be able to tell whether this cost of service was working well, because we could then know if we had these major repairs that we should be budgeting for, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess I'm cool with column 3, assuming that there's nothing in the IGA that compels us to have the other partner share in that revenue from business customers.
Okay. So it sounds like we have consensus on this approach.
Yes. Yes, from my perspective, I
Yes.
mean, the transparency of being able to follow true cost, we weren't there, and it was always hard in my mind to say why we were taking such a loss in the fiber area, where this shows that really it's a break even, and it, from a business case sense, is really better to be carrying on our books, and there's a transparency of why we're doing what we're doing.
It's much more realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we will add this to the budget and replace the one you have in the budget with this cost of service, correct, Mark?
That's right.
And we'll just, and for the record, we'll just understand, and we'll have it reflected in the minutes that this, by consensus, the commission supports this formula or cost of service model.
Great. And then each year as we go forward, it's really going to give us a much better basis of our cost, as Mark said, and as Tom and Patrick were kind of pushing in on.
Yeah, and we'll actually see this then, Mark, in our monthly financials, just like water and electric, correct?
Right. Yeah, their fiber is reported with those financials each month. So, yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mark.
Mark, can you give us back our screen?
Good job, Mark, on the sharing.
I can do that. There it is.
All right.
I got help from Thad and Trina. That's the only reason I could do it.
And Mark, again, thank you just for this ever ongoing financial that you're doing, giving us departmental looks and true costs so that we can really get to the true cost of bringing services to each division and line item.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, we're going to keep you up and take you right over to the adoption of the 2020-21 budget. So if you just continue with us.
Okay. So thought I would just go through the document a little bit again and just highlight a few things that are different than what was in the draft budget. So on page 3 of the PDF that's in the packet, the combined budget summary. So that shows each division and the budget for each division and the total for all. And I looked at the prior years and just thought I would mention here on the net income. So our 4.2 million total net income for all divisions, that's actually about a $2 million decrease from the prior year. And all of the divisions were similar with the exception of water, down a couple million, and that was the result of the timber revenues being higher in 1920 than what we anticipate for 2021. And then our capital plant continues to increase. This year is about a $6.6 million increase over the prior year. And our cash flow, we have about a $3.1 million increase in our ending cash 2021 compared to 1920. So about a $52 million budget, income and expenses, and then cash wise, we're about 54 million. So just the summary there. And then on the, as far as just some changes to highlight, if you go to page 9, the light division budget summary, I thought I'd just mention a couple of the numbers, and I highlighted the changes so you could see them. Pretty easy draft budget to this budget, the proposed budget. So one of the big changes was BPA announced that they are going to suspend the financial reserve surcharge due to COVID-19 impacts on utilities. And that's a $511,000 reduction as a result of that out of next year's budget, the 2021 budget in the power supply costs. So as a result of that, we end up with net income rather than a loss of 127,000 budgeted, and this would be on page 10. We have a $378,000 operating income for 2021. You can see the losses are significant in the out years, and that's the result of a couple things. One, no rate increases are programmed in the budget. We don't do that because it's not been authorized by the commission, so we don't include them in the budget. But it clearly is an indicator that that may need to be considered. Also, I thought this was interesting. If you look again on page 9, and you look at the total revenues, and you can see the year-to-year change for across the different fiscal years. If you look at fiscal year 21-22, there's a reduction of 1.5% on the revenues, but then you drop down to the operating expenses for the same fiscal year, and you can see that there's a 3.1% increase in the costs of the purchase power and transmission. And so I was talking with Jamie today about that. There's not rate increases, BPA rate increases included in those costs. Instead, what happened, and you can see this in the revenues for the industrials. So the revenues in 2021 and then 21, 22, 22, 23, they're all pretty similar, actually slightly lower in the 21, 22, 22, 23 years compared to the budget year we're budgeting for 2021. That was the result of BPA adjusting Cascade Steel's load forecast based on their history. And so they adjusted that down, but so that reduces their kilowatt hour consumption, but it doesn't change their demand. And so the result is they actually, the costs don't come down like the revenues would indicate. The costs actually go up because they don't get a demand credit. And so that's kind of an anomaly, or something that I ended up talking with Jamie about, just because it intuitively doesn't necessarily make sense, but that's why it kind of follows just the BPA methodology for how they charge for their power supply costs.
Tom?
Yeah.
Mark, do we pass that expense through, the extra demand cost? Does that become revenue to us?
So the costs are passed through, but as budgeted, we budget this based on the forecast that they have provided to us. And so we have essentially we have a Cascade Steel forecast, and then we have their forecast for revenues. So we have the expense forecast by Cascade Steel, the adjusted forecast by BPA, which is lower for revenues. And so that's what you get. So as far as what will actually occur, yes, it'll all be passed through. We won't, whatever we get charged, that gets passed through to them. So it just looks kind of odd in the budget.
So John, why don't you take a moment and explain the fact that the demand could stay up, but the KW usage goes way down. Maybe help the
Right.
board.
That was the comment I was going to make, is the demand cost may not change because it depends on how they use energy. And if they may have fewer hours they run, but the demand will still be the same every month.
They're peaking.
Yeah, so their kilowatt hours will drop, but the demand will stay exactly the same. And the more consistently they run, the better they get credit back from BPA. So Tom has a question.
Yeah, Mark, I thought I understood you to be talking about two kinds of forecast, the BPA forecast and Cascades forecast. You use the same forecast information, the same kilowatt hours and demand for both revenues and income, don't you? And expenses, I mean, right?
Yes, yes. But the difference here in this budget is that the revenues have been adjusted by BPA where the expenses have not. So they start off based on.
So there is a disconnect.
There in this,
right?
yeah,
There is a disconnect between.
Yeah, there is between for 21, 22 and 22, 23, the revenues are adjusted from what BPA has indicated they're going to provide versus what the expenses would indicate from Cascade Steel. So in talking with Jamie today, they won't. These numbers will likely not be. They'll come in differently than what we have them here. We just budgeted them this way because this is the information that we have.
When it gets time to set rates, we'll use the same energy projections for both revenues and expenses, right?
Yeah, yeah. When we set rates, it'll be based on estimates that are, effectively what we know to be occurring.
And actually, do we actually even use the industrial, since they're pass-through contracts, in the cost of service model?
Yeah, that's true. It's just passed through.
So really, the cost of service model looks at the customer charge for the industrials.
Yeah.
And that is a percentage of revenue, isn't it, at some point?
Yes, yes.
There's an adder, right? Yes,
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. We also, and you'll see this in a couple places in the budget, if you notice, there's the distribution system. This would be on budget year 2021, 3.127 million. This is for distribution system operation on page 9. A small change there, a $5,400 increase. That relates to a office trailer rental that we potentially thought we might need to do with the current situation and potential social distancing requirements as we bring more folks back to work. And so we put in the budget an additional $9,000 in equipment rental. And so that would be the light portion. There's an adjustment in the water budget too for that. So that was a change. A couple other changes we talked about in the prior meeting in May. Payment in lieu of tax. There was a correction there in 1920. Our estimates were off in the last couple of months of this fiscal year, which made that change to the 1.959 million. So that's pretty much the changes that I was going to highlight related to the light division budget summary. If there's any questions, I can try to answer those. Otherwise, I can kind of keep moving through this.
Any questions further?
Questions?
I'm good.
So if you want to move down to page 13, you'll see the equipment rental change there. That would be for budget year 2021. That $5,400 increase is included in that 17,400, and then also the numbers in the out years adjusted to zero. We typically don't have equipment rental, and just made a formulaic change there for to adjust those to zero. So in the out years, so those changes. Other than that, all of these expense, this is kind of the expense detail that goes to that expense summary we were just looking at. So through page 13, 14, and 15, and 16. So any questions about any of this detail that goes forward to the summary? Okay. So then page 17 is the light division capital. Made a few changes there. And these were just kind of refining some of the capital plans over the last month. We made again, this is on the light division, page 17, up there in transmission, the Lawson Lane transmission pole replacement. We actually moved that and included that into pole replacement. And so that increased the pole replacement cost, moved it from 100 to 130. And then the transmission line for the Lawson Lane, both of those for fiscal year 2021 and 21-22 dropped to zero. So that ended up being about $175,000 savings total with those changes. Then the rest of the capital till you get to page 20 stayed the same, and it's just the general plant is where the changes occurred, and that relates to again some refining in the vehicle capital and also facilities. So the vehicle was a couple of electric only items, bull wheel tensioner and a bucket truck. Both of those costs came down for about a $75,000 total savings there. And then we moved for the facilities, we moved a server room heat pump, was budgeted in 2021, we moved that to 21-22. That was a $10,000 change. So so that's capital, the changes for the light division. Any questions there? Okay, on the water division, I'll jump there then. So if you want to move to the summary there, page 27, the distribution system operation, that blue highlighted number, the 1.698 million number, that includes an additional $3,600 for the office trailer rental. Let's see, the $253,000 operating loss for 2021. One thing we did in looking at that, and you can see the losses going, out into the out years as well. So the cost of service model that Mr. Beauchamp did for us a couple of years ago indicated roughly 3% rate increases annually. If we were to go ahead and none of that's programmed in, if we were to do that, that loss in 2021 drops to 67,000, and then in the out years, there aren't any more losses due to some cost reductions related to personnel and retirements and that kind of thing. So anyway, so the out years, 136 2021, dropping down to $64,000 income in 24-25. So just wanted to provide that information as well. Also, a change that we're going to make is on page 27, just in describing that interest income. We'll just indicate that that is Lafayette as opposed to the regional buy-in, since the buy-in has already happened. So we'll make that change. On page 28, just a couple of changes there. I mentioned the timber revenues. We actually have been collecting revenues ahead of when we anticipated we would for, we thought that we would be collecting those in fiscal year 2021. Instead, they've just with the logging that's going on right now, they're coming in a little earlier. And so we moved 323,000 from 2021 to 1920. So it's not a change, it's just a timing difference. So we've adjusted those numbers for the timber revenue, and then the expenses, we adjusted those down based on the revenues to bring them more in line with the revenues. So that's pretty much the changes in the water division. Capital assets continue to increase throughout the projection. Cash does decrease, but does recover towards the in the last year of the projection with the changes in capital asset acquisition and that. So so that's the water division summary. Any question on that?
Mark, and probably James will have to answer this. Just curious, under expenses, we've added 2 people, and you've stated it's about $250,000. One of them might be related to succession. What exactly is a water quality specialist?
I think James is on here.
So the water quality specialist, that's the backflow. That's always been, it's a newer, the title's new, but the program's always been there. So that was something that had been overseen by Marcy, who was now in HR. And then Mark Knutz has now been promoted into that position. So it's basically our backflow program.
Oh, so it's the backflow.
Yeah,
it is. It's cross connection program.
It's the cross connection control program, which is mandated by the state. Okay.
That is.
All right. I understand. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I think there've been some conversations today with staff and appreciate the changes and stuff, and understanding, as you've heard Tom and I say for years, we really have wanted the water department to be as close to break even as possible related to the actual production and sale of water. So I think this is great and appreciate it.
yeah. We'll probably be back in September with a proposal for a rate increase.
Okay, we need to.
Right.
Great. Thank
Any
you.
questions?
So question on the budget in future years, if we're selling to Lafayette at 1.5x, does that help mitigate rate increases, or the absolute value is not high enough to move the needle?
It does help a little bit. If you look in there, we actually accounted for it in the income.
Page 29 shows that.
Yeah.
It's the wholesale. It shows up as wholesale.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, we show actually in 2021, we show a 0% revenue increase on all the revenues except for the wholesale line. That's Lafayette, comes in at 50,000. And we did that just to be conservative, thinking that with the COVID-19 event, there might be some, financial distress, and people would, from a consumption standpoint, try to, save some money there. And so just to be conservative, we showed that as flat revenue. And then in the out years, it's a 0.5% growth related increase. With the exception of Lafayette, we plug that in at a 3%. So you get a kind of weird looking 0.52% increase in the out years.
So help me understand, like budget 2021 on page 29,
Mhm.
you have, is that actually $50,000 of revenue, or am I not reading that right?
Yeah, it is 50,000 in revenue. Yeah.
For the whole year
Mhm.
from the city of Lafayette?
Yeah.
Okay,
But 50,000 is strictly the sale of water. That's nothing to do with debt service or interest they owe us. You can see
Correct.
that later on the budget. I think, Pat, the bigger concern I have is there are so many uncontrollable issues we have outside of us relating to EPA and the federal government and legislation they might pass. And, you know, some outbreak of some kind of disease or something that's waterborne in one area could end up driving us to do certain things. So I think we're constantly at risk for these standards changing and we're being forced to adopt new standards or new laws.
I think we're being very nice to get for 50 grand a year of revenue to be doing what we're doing,
Yeah.
because it doesn't move the needle for if we're going to do a rate increase or not. But I understand we are taking care of it in terms of interest, and we're trying to help out another community, et cetera. And like,
But they're not that big a purchaser as part of it. So, and again, this is water
I
that
agree with that.
will run down the creek if we don't, you know, without selling it. So,
You got to start somewhere.
right.
I totally support that.
And also, excuse me, Patrick, I'm sorry. We've also intentionally limited how much we're selling to them, because we don't want to get in a position where we have these huge capital expenditures to make our system bigger before we really want to, just because if they grow uncontrollably. So that's why their contract was set up as a set maximum, and we don't have to sell them any more than that. So the downside of that, of course, is that we make less money, but it just shows how cheap our water is.
Yes. And so do we have any idea what percentage of their total water need that 50 grand a year represents?
No.
Don't.
We probably could go back to our research and figure it out, because we've had them give us their annual needs based on the regional water system and that, and we could back into the number, I guess. But, you know, they just approved another, 280 house subdivision. I mean, I can't imagine their sewer plant can continue to handle this capacity.
No, that'll be their next project. And the other thing with Lafayette is, you know, they have the joint well field, and that production is dropping off. So at some point, they won't have another source.
So they come back to us then to get that ceiling bumped if needed?
That's why it's a 500 gallon per minute ceiling, and they're looking at starting at about half that number.
Okay.
They still have some production coming off their springs, but it's very, you can't depend upon it.
Yeah, exactly. Summertime, production's way down on their springs.
Or at least they have some margin.
Correct.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, any other questions for Mark?
No, thank you. And glad we had the precursor to this last month and made it easy this time to kind of go through and catch up with stuff. So appreciate it. Thanks for the help.
So if it's my understanding tonight, we need to adopt the 2020-21 budget.
Yes, and that would be for all three divisions.
Okay. So
And-
light, water and fiber.
And would it be also with the caveat that the
Correct.
fire budget previously, that's based on the pole contact model, that would be adopted with this as opposed to the fiber budget that's in the document?
I would move for all of that.
Okay.
But it's column 3, right?
Yes.
It would actually be what you would see in the budget document would be column 2. Column 3 represents how we calculate the revenue requirement.
For the partners.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine.
So it's been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in
Second.
favor? All in favor of adopting the budget for 2020-21, please indicate by saying aye.
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 The budget for 2020-21 passes unanimously 4-0. Okay, that takes us to our next area, and that is the authorization of value added solution for online interface, OBI with NISC. And I don't see John on the line. So is the other John going to take this?
I think Sam's gonna take
Okay.
this.
Okay, and we're not gonna ask you for any action on this this evening. Actually, after John produced his memo, we had some kind of additional questions that came up both with NISC and with MasterCard. So we'll just not ask you to take any action tonight, and we'll bring this back at a later date.
Okay. Then that would take us to our last item under new business, which is the review of the extension policy updates.
And I'll take that one too.
Okay.
Really, we're at a point. You remember last month, the drafts were in the packet, and likewise on this item, we're not asking for any action. And I really just wanted to put the issue back on the agenda just to kind of give you a status and kind of let you know we're still working on it. I've had some good feedback from commissioners, anticipating that we'll get some more feedback. I've also had some more additional feedback from staff. What I intend to do is in the probably the next 5 to 6 days, get a final not a final, but a revised draft of the extension policy and the extension agreement. At least we've been working with the electric form of the extension agreement, but the two forms, the water and the electric extension, track pretty closely, and get those and incorporate both the commissioners' comments back to me and also additional staff comments that I've received in the last couple of weeks. I really just didn't have time to kind of put that all together before this meeting. And then by next week, I'm hopeful to get in front of staff and kind of go through all the commissioners' suggested changes, review that with them, and then get a revision back out to at least to Commissioner Gormley and Commissioner Tankersley so they could see those. I think we're probably pretty close to having documents. And then by the next meeting, hopefully have any issues for the entire commission to discuss, kind of narrowed down to a couple things, and not really make it a drafting session as much as if we have a couple of sort of issues that still need to be resolved. And the one that probably might require some discussion revolves around bonding. And that might be something that the entire commission might want to hear about and kind of hear some history on, and kind of a decision be made on that. But that's kind of where we're at. And so you probably will see, if any of the other commissioners are interested, I can certainly share it with them too. But I know I've been in active discussions with Commissioner Tankersley and Gormley for seeking their feedback. And so I anticipate getting you both revised drafts early next week. And that's where I'm at.
Okay. Any further questions for Sam? Thank you for the update. That takes us to the executive session. And in our executive session tonight, it's going to be pursuant to ORS 192-660-2F to consider information and records that are exempt from public disclosure under ORS 192-501-23 relating to identifying security measures, individual, building, and information processing. So, Trina, I'll let you take anyone off